Druid is another deck that has stood the test of time. The general concept of Druid has stayed the same for a long time, and will continue to stay the same for a while to come, I imagine. It is to be able to really efficiently push out big, efficient threats early, and then finish the game with minimum 14 damage of a combo. So the strengths of Druids are, you have two cards, Innervate and Wild Growth, which accelerate your game so that you can get the very efficient Shade of Naxxramas out. Possibly if you're going turn 2, you coin Wild Growth, you get it as early as turn 2. It becomes like a 5/5 for 3 mana later on. Everyone knows about the sheer efficiency of Piloted Shredder. Keeper of the Grove is a very efficient card. Ancient of Lore's efficiency is insane, one of the best cards in the game. 7 mana 5/5, draw 2 cards, and has a slight flexibility of doing this. And especially noteworthy is with Innervate. Sometimes you have some insane starts. You Innervate out Emperor Thorsan before they can deal with it. You Innervate out Dr. Boom before they can deal with it. The earlier the big threats come down, the harder it is to deal with it. And at the end of the game, sometimes you've exhausted your cards. You have that Ancient of Lore to redraw your hand. Force of Nature, Savage Roar, an infamous Druid combo to deal a minimum of 14 damage. Some other cards to consider in this deck are Ancient of War, Cenarius, and Piloted Skygolem. If the format is more aggro heavy, a second Chow, and Sludge Belcher is also good if you're aiming for beating the aggro matchup with more ease. Harrison Jones and Lotheb are cards which come in and out depending on how many weapons there are, depending on how many spell heavy decks there are. 2 Force of Nature is constantly a point of debate and change. Oftentimes there will be 1 copy of Force of Nature, 1 of 2 Savage Roar. Some decks don't even run a Zombie Chow because against certain decks it is quite bad, against certain decks it is quite good.
The light shall bring victory.
I must protect the wild.
The Mulligan Strategy for this deck is quite simple. You keep Wild Growth, and you keep Innervate. Against aggressive decks, you're going to want to keep Zombie Chow and Wrath. Usually you keep Shade of Nax. Sometimes you keep Piloted Shredder. Keeper of the Grove is a commonly good card that you would keep against certain aggressive decks as well. But the thing that you're most happy with in this deck is to draw the Wild Growth. So much so that in a lot of tournaments, casters, they almost make fun of the skill of this deck being drawing the Wild Growth onto. And certainly your chances of winning the game go up a lot when you have this card and you play it on turn 2. But it's not a sure win if you do, and it's certainly not a sure loss if you don't. The general concept of this deck is very straightforward. You simply play what is most mana efficient each turn, most of the time. In this case, I have up to 4 mana and I have nothing, and that's really bad. You can imagine it would be even worse if I didn't have Wild Growth. Then I would be spending an extra turn doing nothing. And of course, a turn 5, 5/4 is nothing to be happy about, but at least it's something. The good news is Harrison Jones appears to have drawn out a Shadow Word Death, and that is going to allow Emperor Thorsan to possibly live. That would be amazing. Sometimes with this deck you can get really insane Thorsan discounts, such as getting it on Force of Nature, Savage Roar, and Savage Roar, and that would do a total of 14 plus 6, so that's a 22 damage combo. For 9 mana, someday. So as you approach the late game with this deck, which has been accelerated thanks to Wild Growth and Emperor Thorsan, you're purely looking to deal a very exact number of damage.
Where shall I strike?
You're looking to set your opponent down to the exact number at which they will die to the combo. In this case, well, common things to think about are that Force of Nature Savage Roar does 14, and then you add in your minions, and then you add 2 per minion. So, for example, Force of Nature Savage Roar right now would do 14 plus 4 is 18 plus 2 is 20. I believe this is lethal. This by default is 14 plus 8 is 22. You add in the 4 plus 2 here, which is 28. No, that's not lethal. So we're going to need to do a little bit more. In this case, I'm going to try to preserve the health on my 4/4. But yeah, key numbers to think about. 14 by default here. You don't really have to think about this combo too often, but for specific simplicity's sake, that's 22. And then you add in 4 and 4, that's 26, that's 30. You add in 2 and 2, 32, 34. And this is pretty much the cookie cutter of how ridiculous this deck can look. Okay, so if you thought that last game was bad, let's see. So one of the things really important to do in the early game is to plan out your turns. Like, before you even mulligan, I think Druid has some of the toughest ideas of what to do, especially when you're going second, because you have to think about using the coin, you have to think about using the Innervate. I think you actually want to toss a Wild Growth here. And you also don't coin out Wild Growth. The reason why not to coin out Wild Growth is because you can't do anything on turn. You can't do it. I mean, you would coin out Wild Growth if your plan was to Innervate out Druid the Claw, and that's what some people would do with this hand. However, the problem with that is that then you have this long period of time where you're doing absolutely nothing. It's a little bit more reasonable because the opponent has let off with a very aggressive Mana Worm. But the plan is still going to be just turn 2 Wild Growth, get to 3 mana, Innervate out, coin out the Emperor Thaurissan. Okay, so that's interesting. Now Innervate Thaurissan is a possible play. Okay, so this is where you actually have to really spend time thinking about how you're going to set out the turns for the future. If you do Innervate Thaurissan, then the Druid of the Claw costs 4, which would mean you can coin it out. This is the most likely moment in time for the opponent to not have an answer to Thaurissan, since 4 cannot, since Fireball costs 4, so it would have to be exactly Flame Cannon or Frostbolt, and you would have to trade in the Mana Worm for it. So in this case, it'll be worth it to do this. This is a really rare situation to actually have Wild Growth on 2 and not play it. Because in the worst case, where he has Frostbolt or Flame Cannon, he still also has to lose the Mana Worm. And I'm a little bit more willing to play it aggressively because he has a very aggressive deck. And the situations in which this actually survives to give one more turn of discounts is high-ish. The card I drew wasn't actually... This hand is turning... It's turning kind of bad. It's still alright. I mean, this opening is really good. But the follow-up draw, it turns out that this is too much mana reduction.
My magic will tear you
I probably play Wild Growth next turn. And he needs exactly Fireball here. Or Flame Cannon to Fire Blast. Okay, I drew a reasonable card. I don't think I play any of the wild growths. These are just going to be waiting until turn 10 to be drawing a card. In case of duplicate, I'll do this first. And I use this, even though it's 1 extra damage, because if I get counterspelled, this should go in there. It is Mirror Entity, and Mage is actually one of the best matchups to go against Druid, which is another way is to say Druids. One of Druid's worst matchups is Mage, exactly because of Mirror Entity. They have very few ways to trigger that safely. So here I'm going to have to give him a 5/5, which is good for him, but oh well. And this deck usually wants to control until they have specifically enough damage to force Savage. However, in this case, there's no real favorable trading that I can do. So I'll let him do the trades. Additionally, having Emperor Thorsan trade this turn is silly because he's actually giving my cards a discount still. And he's going to... the opponent will do the trades that you wanted to do anyways. The opponent's getting low enough that... well, here I'm going to still just board control. Swipe, hero ability, hit face. This looks like it's 6, 10, 14 damage from spells. Keeper adds 1, but this is too good. There's a decent chance that this 5/5 survives to hit face again. And even if not, this is still 10 damage. Oh, I should have Wild Growth there, because it would have sped it up into this 10 damage turn. I'd gotten too used to my cards. Usually, Wild Growth is bad to be played anywhere from turn... usually there's only one specific turn that you would play it in late, which is turn 7. So you can speed into turn 8, Force of Nature, Savage Roar, but... situations change. In this case, playing the Wild Growth would have been good to speed into turn 8, force swipe for the... anyways, let's actually get a game where it doesn't look ridiculous.
I will fight with honor. I must protect the wild.
Okay, specifically against Paladin, swipe is a card that wants to be kept due to... if you don't swipe their muster for battle, you might get quartermastered and then lose the game. Wrath, it's rare for the Paladin to be aggressive enough. This would usually end up cycling. Kind of want to draw for the Wild Growth / Innervate. And Shade of Naxxramas is reasonable enough to keep by default. This card is up in the air on whether or not to keep. I'll toss it. I'll keep it all for flexibility.
Well met. My greetings.
You can innervate Shade of Naxxramas here, but the key is to look into the future and see what you can spend your mana on. And I don't think it's critical enough to do this. I'd rather try to innervate out something that costs 6 or 7. Well, that would be, yeah, 6 or 7.
Shields up. Red alert.
For the wild.
You do see people innervate Shade out all the time, and I think that kind of depends on the hand, or even a little bit on way of preference of playing the deck. And also about matchup, like if it's an aggressive deck, of course you innervate out Shade. But in this case, I think Paladin is slow enough that you can afford to just do this. One other thing to look out for is getting the Shade in before they can Area of Effect it out. There are a lot of classes that deal 2 damage Area of Effect, such as Paladin with Consecration, but he can't consecrate this. Not that I would mind too much if he consecrationed my one guy. but things to look out for constantly. Nope, bad luck on the COD camera RNG there. So, Azure Drake, you always want to... There's only one copy of Azure Drake in this deck, but it is so good with Swipe and Wrath. However, I think it would be a little too slow to plan for Azure Drake Innervate Wrath. So, on this turn, Wrathing makes sense. Wrathing for 3, you would get to remove the card, but in this case, I think I'm planning to play Swipe the next turn. So I'm going to Wrath for that, and then Hero Ability Swipe until I drew the Piloted Shredder, and now I'm actually going to play Piloted Shredder. A play like Swipe into Wrath, like Swipe Innervate Wrath, that clears the board, but it's too safe, and you don't play around quite a few of the Paladin cards. Sometimes by so aggressively clearing the board, you miss out on a lot of value. One of the things about Paladin, this is about to get really scary, is I'm almost considering playing Azure Drake because that's 9 damage and that would put me at 6, but Paladins aren't that aggressive. But okay, that is a little too much. That's true. I will, however, still continue to keep the Shade hidden. This is still mana efficient. Swipe does want to be kept for muster for battle ideally, but this hits enough stuff. That's unfortunate. No way to activate this in this. Never mind, there's Keeper. That's actually not too bad then. But Keeper usually wants to hit Tyrion and Sylvanas. So the good news about the Paladin matchup when they're kind of slow like this is you only have to play around whatever damage they have on the board plus something like 6 or 10 over a long period of time. So even though the health total is 13, it's not feeling that scary right now. This card finally gets its value by being able to kill most of the Sludge Belcher. Consecration hit is very clean for him. But I've got Dr. 7. One of the reasons why Dr. Boom is so good in this deck is because the extra Boom bots, they can be as strong as 5/1s with a double Savage Roar. And I want to kind of like explain the fast way to calculate it, I guess. So you add up these and that's 9, and then you just do 2 times the number of minions that can attack, including you. So 2 times 4 would be 8, so 7 plus 8, 15. Keeper of the Grove on this silencing is especially good because it also restores its health back to 5, but I'm wondering if I need to perhaps save it for Tyrion. So the amount of damage I would do is 4, 5, 6 plus 8 is 14. Ancient of Lore is probably better. Just Ancient of Lore is usually good when you've run out of great options. And I do have some good options still, like Druid of the Claw. But that's not spending the mana efficiently enough. So this is the part of the game where, I mean, you just keep trying to live and then just keep trying to play mana efficiently until you get the Force of Nature Savage Roar. I'm actually happy that he lay on hands because it means that my board control is uncontested for a longer period of time. With this deck, you should constantly keep a running count of how much damage you have because it is easy to miss lethal. Druid of the Claw charging and Savage Roar is also a common way to achieve a lot of damage. Here I don't have lethal, I believe. 5, 6, 7, 11, and then Savage Roar deals 10, so that's 21 damage. So another Savage Roar would have done it, or Force of Nature would have done it. I thought about charging this or even not playing it, because one of the ways he can come back from this is Consecration. And he would attack this and then he would Consecration. So not my favorite play, but I'll do it. I wouldn't have done it if he hadn't played a Consecration this game.
Move quickly.
Looks like an imperfect solution from the opponent.
My shield.
Oh, Defender of Argus. Alright, so I have 5, 6, 7, 10, 14 with the silence. And then adding 6 times 2, 12. That's 26 damage. Adding the Wrath for 3. It's 29. He's at 28. So I should be able to make this happen. There's slightly difficult things due to the no, this will be exact at minimum. And you can kind of see how it's really important to have these general watches for lethal.
Time waits for no one.
And it's going to be important to try to minimize the... Uh-oh. Wait, actually...
For the wild.
Okay, that was really lucky. Better would have been to send in a Boombot first, because I needed that to possibly deal damage to a relevant target. Well, no, it would have been about the same. But in order for that to have been lethal, Boombot needed to either deal 1 damage to face, 1 damage to one of the zombie chows. No, the first thing that should have been done there was Boombot to one of the zombie chow specifically. So there was like a 3 out of 4 chance of winning. And it took me a bit more time due to having to explain it, but as you can see, a lot of it has to do with math of Savage Roar, just being able to add it quickly, and then just playing efficiently, curve out early.